Welcome to another special edition of Airline Daily News focusing on the search for MH370. And today, delighted to say, joined by my co-host, Blaine Gibson. Hey, Blaine, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Jeffrey?
Very well, my friend, very well. So today we're going to look at questions that we didn't get to the other day, and there's a whole bunch of them. So if you're all set to go, let's crack on, Blaine. Um,
Okay, I'm
from
ready.
from the Plug Seeker. Question. Many thanks for the ongoing insightful and factual coverage in the channel regarding MH370. Assuming the plane and black box data recorder are found, what do you think are the key specific pieces of information data from the data recorder that might solve the mystery and prove or disprove if the alleged culprit is the captain? Your thoughts on that, Blaine?
Well, thank you for the question, Plug Seeker, and I really appreciate the objective way you have phrased the question, using the word alleged and not expressing certainty over what happened to MH370 because we don't know. You've asked a very good question. I'm pretty confident that the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder can be recovered. The deepest recovery of a black box ever was from 4,900 meters. And as long as the seal is not broken, was not destroyed at the time of the crash, there's a good chance that the data will be recoverable for 11 or 12 years after the crash. Starting with the cockpit voice recorder, because that is a much shorter answer. Unfortunately, it records over itself every 2 hours. So that'll only tell us about the last 2 hours of flight. We would know if someone was alive in the cockpit breathing. We would know if someone said something, and we'd also hear what alarms were going off and warnings at the time of the crash. So that would be helpful, but the real holy grail is the flight data recorder. That should give us all the answers we need, assuming it can be recovered and the data is recoverable. For one thing, it would tell us immediately at the time of the turnaround if there was any electrical problem, malfunction, fire, explosion that might have caused the original diversion or that occurred any time after that. It would tell us if there was any hacking attempt or intrusion into the cockpit. We could pick that up. So those are some very important questions that could be resolved by that early on. Onwards, there's much more that it will tell us. It would give us the exact flight route, the altitude. It would tell us if it is manually flown or on autopilot, for how long. It would tell us of any depressurization and alarms, deployment of oxygen masks. It would provide or dismiss a lot of evidence as to what happened. So that is the holy grail. I believe that if we can recover the flight data recorder, and if the data is recoverable, that will not only know what happened, how, who, and perhaps maybe even why.
Jane Glue, 6281. Blaine, thank you for all you are doing. I wondered if any personal effects from any of the passengers have ever been recovered. Has a suitcase or such like ever been found that could identify one of the passengers? Also, with all the bits and pieces that have come ashore, might this mean that the only real way of discovering MH370 would be to find the black boxes. Thank you for thank you for taking the time to try and answer some of our millions of questions. Good question, Blaine.
Jane, very good questions. First, relating to the black boxes, as I just answered to Plug Seeker, I believe that is the Holy Grail, and that is really the only thing that will tell us the maximum amount we can learn about what happened to Malaysia 370. The personal effects is a very good and important question that is very dear to my heart, because I have found many possible personal effects in Madagascar, none of which could be definitely linked to the plane, but definitely worthy of investigation. First of all, before me, at about the same time that he found the flaperon, Johnny Begg found a handbag in La Réunion and handed it over to the gendarmes. There are pictures of it. And when Johnny Begg was shown some screenshots from the CCTV video of one of the passengers getting on the plane with a bag, he said, "Hey, that looks like the bag I found." And one of the relatives of that passenger looked at the bag, the pictures of the bag found by Johnny Bag, and said, "Hey, that looks like my loved one's handbag." We never heard anything from the French about the investigation into this handbag, and I wish they would. Now, there are many more possible personal effects: handbags, suitcase, computer case, belt, caps, backpack, that I found on Sirica and Riake beaches at the same time that I found 370 debris. Now, first of all, there were no passports or ID cards. The bags were generally empty, no credit cards, no luggage tags that could definitely be tied to the plane. However, these were not local items. These are items that washed ashore from somewhere in the open Indian Ocean. They were of tremendous interest to me. I handed them in to local Madagascar authorities. They were then forwarded to Malaysia. I handed some into the JAC in Australia for investigation, and also handed them to the Royal Malaysia Police, the RMP, who are responsible for investigation into personal effects. The officer, young guy who received them, was very dutiful, very careful, gave me a receipt from the RMP. However, nothing was ever published on these. So what we did, a group of us volunteers, was together with Cher Keane, the head of Air Crash Support Group Australia, we posted pictures of these bags on her ASGO website, which is a family support group, so that next of kin could look and see if maybe they could recognize anything. And we also had a group of volunteers looking at the CCTV video of passengers going through the boarding gate for Malaysia 370 to see if there were possible matches. And we found about 6 possible matches. There was a green and yellow bag that had the logo of a travel agency in China that had sold tickets on the China Southern code share of Malaysia 370. A belt, a slipper, a backpack with headphones, and I think probably most interesting is this right here, which really appears to be the top of a Kuala Lumpur International Airport duty-free bag. The top still sealed, torn off,
Mm.
and whatever the contents were is gone. It was torn off here. But this looks like what a lot of the passengers were carrying on to the plane. So it's a very good question. You can imagine how when I found the computer case and anytime I found any bags, my heart was pounding, wondering, am I going to find an SD card, a passport, a cell phone, a USB, or a message in a bottle from a loved one in their final moments. But it never happened. I never found anything that could be definitely tied to the plane.
Mm. Fascinating, Blaine, fascinating. So, Big P 1073, thank you, Blaine. You are a very good person. All your work is very much appreciated. Thank you for all your time and effort from Peter in Melbourne, Australia. I have one question for you. I've been following your search for MH370 for years now, and I remember something I read that said that you were receiving death threats for finding debris for MH370. Is this true? And if so, why? If you are trying to help find the debris, is this happening? And that's a very good question, and I'd like to ask you that question as well.
Yes, it is a very good question, Peter, and thank you very much for asking it and for your support. Yes, I have received numerous death threats, regular threats, been targeted by 2 or 3 burglaries. I've received hate messages and also separately been targeted by false accusations and a very professional and personal character assassination campaign, badly defamed. And it is very sad. And the problem is that some of these hateful accusations can avalanche. It's like blood in the water, and then more sharks come in and they build on one another, and the accusations get worse. Words can be very powerful and they can inspire further acts of hatred and hate messages. And that's the danger there. You ask why? Well, I ask why myself. It's become very clear to me that there are some people in interests that definitely do not want Malaysia 370 found and do not want the truth known at all. But then there's a much larger group that simply have their own pet theories and agendas and locations to push and are busy selling books and pushing those theories and agendas to the point that it's become all about their theories and agendas and not about finding the truth, whatever it was. And that's very sad. And first of all, some of them tend to just ignore or disregard any debris that disproves their pet theory or argues against their pet theory. And that is not good, but it is understandable that that happens. However, where it really crosses the line is when they go so far as to personally attack and discredit anyone who is finding and reporting that evidence. And that is unacceptable. And I have been targeted by those as a finder of debris. Richard has been targeted by those for pioneering a new method of aircraft tracking. And other people have been targeted by that simply because of their own theory and their own flight route. And that is unacceptable. Those personal attacks cross the line and need to stop. We need to find the truth, whatever it is, and we need to find the plane wherever it is.
It's interesting. Nothing like what you've experienced, Blaine, but ever since we started this channel and focused on the fact that there are people in Malaysia who don't want to find it, I've been getting phone calls from Malaysia, probably 3 or 4 a day, and every time it's a different number, and every time I answer it, there's no one there. Just a low-level harassment. Nothing like a death threat, but a low-level harassment. So it's a very, very peculiar, weird situation. Anyway, Dave Orr, Bubic 3378. My warmest congratulations on the excellent job you guys do. I'm an avid fan of your show. A question for Blaine. Is the hydrographic analysis run based on an assumed impact point, or is it totally independent of such an assumption? In other words, could the plane have crashed anywhere else, i.e., South China Sea, the Malacca Strait, with the same flopsum appearing in the same places, in other words, in Africa? I can answer that, but you're the debris expert. You answer it.
Well, thank you for the question, Davor. That's a very good one. The short answer is that the oceanographic drift analysis proves beyond any doubt that Malaysia 370 crashed somewhere in the southeastern Indian Ocean near the search area. It could not possibly have crashed in the South China Sea or the Straits of Malacca or the Andaman Sea or numerous other places that people have claimed and postulated. And here's why. The oceanographic drift analysis is forward particle drift simulation. It's done from a large number of possible impact points. The UWA drift analysis, which accurately predicted the timing and location of arrival of 370 debris, shows that the crash site was most likely somewhere between 28.3 degrees south to 33.2 degrees south. And it could, of course, be much wider from the seventh arc than previously searched. The CSIRO oceanographic simulations, they show debris and particles moving a little bit faster. So that would extend the likely impact area, crash site, down to 36.5 degrees south, being most likely in the 34s or 35s. However, according to CSIRO, the low 30s are also possible. So both the UWA and CSIRO analysis and other professional drift analysis done prove absolutely that 370 did not crash in the South China Sea, Gulf of Thailand, Malacca Strait, or Andaman Sea. If 370 had crashed in those areas, debris would have been found very quickly, immediately on the shorelines of those bodies of water. And they were not. And debris would not have gone from there to the Mascarenes, Madagascar, and Southern Africa, where 370 debris did. So the 370 debris, the 43 pieces of it, could only have come from the southeastern Indian Ocean near the search area. The debate, within reason, is about what is the exact area where it most likely came from.
Yeah, and while Blaine's been talking, I'm showing you current the currents of the Indian Ocean, the way they flow, and the known location of MH370 is in a current called the Western Australian Current, which goes north to the equator, then turns west and down across to the African coast and then goes south. And that's why the debris is where it is. So, but if you look at the South China Sea and if you look at the Straits of Malacca, you will see that debris would swirl around in all sorts of other locations way away from the coast of Africa. So, yeah. Now, on the subject of
Correct.
debris, we're talking about debris. Scott Crawford, 4148. Blaine, did you find any parts of the landing gear?
Well, Scott, yes, I did. In fact, I found the part of the nose landing gear door on Ansirica Beach in Madagascar. And that's an interesting story because I actually did not find it. I put out the word among local people after I'd found debris on Riake Beach. I went to Ansirica, which is a peninsula on the main island of Madagascar. And this one man brought me something that his wife had been using as a washing board. So the Tatali debris was not the only piece of debris that was being used as a washing board. The nose landing gear door was as well. And of course, being Africa, I gave him a small reward for that. You put the word out, and then you've got everybody out looking for debris, especially the little kids. And that was June 26th. So that was the Independence Day in Madagascar. So, yes, I found that. It's in the Annex 13 report. And it's a very important piece of debris that should have been examined forensically much more closely. Because from the different pressures and stresses on it, if really closely investigated, it could tell a lot about how the plane impacted the water. And the authorities seemed to be more interested in just identifying what it was than really thoroughly investigating what we could learn from it.
Yeah. Now, Mike Petiti says, first off, I love the videos, so informative, factual, and understandable to the layperson. Please keep up the great work. Well, we intend to, Mike, for sure. My question is in a couple of parts and is as follows. Based on your interactions with the MH370 families, Blaine, what do you need? What do they need for closure in this matter? Is it plain debris at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, such as engines, wings, and wing box, so they know exactly where the plane went down? If other, please advise. Asking because I think closure for the families is the number one consideration here, and I agree with you absolutely. Blaine, your thoughts on that question from Mike?
And I agree with you too that closure for the families is of paramount importance and needs to be done. We all owe it to them. But the family members also point out, don't make it just about us. Make this about aviation safety. We need to find out what happened so that everyone who flies is protected and we can take steps to make sure this never happens again. So that is the perspective that the families take, and I agree with them. Um, Only the family members can speak for themselves. And individual family members may very well give you a different answer about what closure they need. I have come to know some of them closely, personally, and become friends, but I'll tell you, as much as we talk about it, I can never put myself in their position and fully understand how they feel. I know that it is very important to them to know where their loved ones rest. Finding the crash site in itself and knowing absolutely with proof that the plane crashed and knowing where will mean a lot to them. As to whether that is enough for some of them to get closure and move on, I don't know. I can't say. Only they can answer that. I know that it is important to some of them to know what happened and how how their loved ones felt, and if possible, why this happened. I think they all want to know as much as they can about that. And at what point that gives them closure, well, that is up to them to decide. Only they can decide that. Uh, some are unwilling to accept that their loved ones are gone, and that is their right. It is not any of our right to tell them when they should give up hope and move on. That is a personal decision that they all must make. I know that to some, it's important to have proof that MH370 crashed, other than just the floating debris that I and other people have found. They need to find the actual crash site and the proof that it crashed, and to some evidence that their loved ones were on the plane when it did. So if any personal effects or remains could be recovered from the underwater crash site, that I believe would be very important to some of them, maybe to all of them. But it really only they can answer that question of what it takes for them to be able to find closure and move on. That's up to each individual family member to decide.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Blaine. I was with you when we met a number of them in Perth. You may remember it, and listening to their stories around that boardroom table, and there wasn't a dry eye in the place. Even the cameraman and the sound engineer had tears rolling down their face when they were listening to these absolutely gut-wrenching stories of loss and bewilderment. And this is just unprecedented in modern times. So you answered that really, really well. So Joanne Jacobs, 9240, I believe the main body remained largely intact upon impact with the water. If you examine the records, you'll see that in accidents involving Asiana Flight 214 and British Airways Flight 38, the aircraft did not break apart. That is, of course, if they attempted a controlled ditch. Now, I'm going to answer this first, and then Blaine's going to come in as well. Viewers, the accident that Joanne's referring to, the Asiana Flight 214, was in San Francisco 2012. An Asiana 777 undershot the runway. The undercarriage hit the seawall, ripped away, and then the 777 cartwheeled several times, and it remained largely intact. That's perfectly true. The British Airways one, Flight 38, that was a landing at Heathrow, and the engines cut out because of ice contamination, and it was just simply a belly landing. So I think we should dismiss that one completely. Having said that, the Boeing 777 is the strongest aeroplane I think Boeing ever built. Is really a very strong aeroplane. However, having said that, I think we can largely dismiss those two crashes, because this one I think is very different by the level of debris that we have found. Now, I've said on a couple of earlier programs, this plane would have at least broken into three, ahead of the wing box, behind the wing box, but I think it shattered into more pieces. I still think there's some substantial pieces, but this aeroplane clearly shattered, and there was no way it was a controlled ditching. Whoever was in control may have been attempting to do that, but at the end, the fuel was run out. This aeroplane impacted the water with tremendous force, evidenced by all the debris that's been found, some of it by Blaine. Now I'll pass it over to you, Blaine. But before we go any further, things like undercarriage and the engine cores, it's highly likely they will be on the ocean floor. But Blaine, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with you, Jeffrey, that 370 shattered, and the jury is out on whether it was an attempted ditching or not. The ATSB and Boeing and Annex 13 concluded that it was not an attempted ditching. They found that the wing flap was retracted at the time of separation.
Yep.
Others have disagreed with that and say that it was an attempted ditching, and some even go so far as to ridiculously insist that the plane is intact or the fuselage is intact underwater. It's not. And I agree with what you've said, Jeffrey. I can only speak about what the debris tells me. But I'd also add that I used to work on an expedition cruise ship in the Southern Ocean, sailing between Antarctica and South America and east along the Antarctic coast. And all I can say is that the Southern Ocean and the Southern Indian Ocean is rough. It's got huge swells. It's not like a runway or the approach to a runway. And it's not like the Hudson River. So I concur with what you say, and I'd add to that my own experience on seeing what the Southern Ocean is like.
In fact, we've said on an earlier episode, and I'll put the shot up for the viewers. There was a cold front going through when MH370 was lost on March the 8th, and the sea state was about 3 meters. For those who work imperial, that's 10 feet. So you slam into a 10-foot wave, and even if you're trying to do a glide, you slam into a 10-foot wave, you're going to be smashed to pieces. So,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
but look, we've got there's one question I really want us to answer. We've got a bit of time left. Honkanen 72 says, has the Indian Ocean trash patches ever been searched for debris? Now, viewers, this current West Australian current goes round and around and around the Indian Ocean, and in the middle of it is a trash patch. Now, Blaine, have they ever done anything about searching that trash patch?
Well, actually, there are a lot of maps, and there was a lot of talk about a trash patch in the southern Indian Ocean. But according to Professor Patiarachi and other oceanographers I've talked to, there is not a trash patch to the extent that there is a garbage patch in the Atlantic and a garbage patch in the Pacific.
Okay.
What is happening in the Indian Ocean is that debris is circulating around. So there is a chance that it can be caught up there and just going round and round. There is a chance that some could come back towards Australia and beach there, more likely on the southern coast of Australia than the western coast. But it really appears that most of the debris, since none has come back to Australia, gets caught in eddies and washes ashore in Madagascar, Mozambique, South Africa, which is sort of like a backstop. It washes ashore, it gets buried in sand, it washes back out, it gets pushed in by a hurricane, and some of it is leaking over into the Atlantic, probably, even though none has been found in the Atlantic. So
Yeah.
the existence of a garbage patch in the southern Indian Ocean is not as good a prospect for a search as it would have been in the Atlantic or the Pacific.
Right. Well, viewers, that's about all that we've got time for today. And because the consensus, by the way, is you like 30 minutes, you don't want an hour. And I don't think I could handle an hour of Blaine anyway. So half an hour is just great.
I don't
And
think
you,
Blaine can handle an hour of Blaine either. So
no,
there we
and
go.
I think 30 minutes of me is plenty too. So, viewers, look, thank you so much for watching. Blaine, thank you so much for being here. Maybe we can reconnect with you on Monday and do another session because I'm sure we'll get a lot more questions out of this session today, and they keep coming through. And so, viewers, please subscribe to us, please like us, please keep those comments coming, and please tune in tomorrow when we have Richard back, which should be fascinating. So thank you very much indeed, Blaine.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. And the questions have been excellent, very perceptive, and I enjoy answering more.